Here's how a polarizer filter can help improve your landscape photos, and I'll show you a few examples here of the differences of with filter and without filter in a second. But the main thing that this polarizer is going to do is reduce reflections. And there's two spots you're really gonna see this in landscape photography. That's reflections off of water and reflections off the sky. So here, take a look at this first comparison. This is from Matthew Littlewood, epic photographer. You can see with the filter, the glare is reduced off this lake here, leaving behind a beautiful deep blue color. Now, without the filter, there's a lot of glare, so that saturated color isn't able to come through because you're seeing a lot of glare from the reflection of the sky. So you can see that CP's really cutting that glare and also separating the subject of, you can see the person in the yellow jacket there a lot more clearly. It really pops off the photo than without the filter. Now let's take a look at another example of what the polarizer can do to the sky. So in the sky, there's actually a lot of reflected light going on, and the polarizer helps reduce that. So you can check this out in this example. You see the icebergs, and right above it, the skyline is much, much darker than without the filter. And that's because the polarizer can reduce up to 1.5 stops of reflected light out of your composition. And what this does is two things. It leaves behind the deep, deep blue saturated sky, the color of the sky is, instead of all the reflective light, which sometimes you see here without the filter. It's just very, very light, not a saturated blue. So you can see the polarizers making the sky that deep blue, really giving the subject separation of that iceberg from the background of the sky. And actually another bonus thing that's going on in this composition here is the polarizer is reducing a lot of the reflected light off of the water, which leaves behind, you can see that reflection of the iceberg in the water a lot more definitively with the polarizer than without the polarizer. Now let's talk about how to use a polarizer. So a polarizer is going to be most effective 90 degrees from your light source when shooting outside, it's the sun. So actually, if you're shooting like kind of directly at the sun, a polarizer is really not going to have any effect because all it's doing is reducing reflected light. And when you're at the light source, there's nothing reflecting other than the actual light source itself. So to get the maximum impact of a polarizer, we want to be at least 90 degrees away from that light source. Now, a polarizer rotates, right? So as we rotate this filter, we're changing the plane of polarization. So if I'm trying to polarize the ground, you're gonna have to spin it and look through the viewfinder until you find the maximum polarization for the ground relative to the sun. Now, if you have another subject in the same frame that is on a different plane, say 90 degrees, maybe the side of a car, that's gonna need to be aligned differently with your polarizer. So you're gonna have to choose kind of, are you reducing the reflection on the ground or the water or the sky, or are you reducing the reflection on the car? And you can see that here in this frame. So I've got the polarizer right now set to reduce the most amount of light from the sky, and that's just gonna allow the clouds to pop a bit more. Now in the next frame, I actually have the polarizer set 90 degrees the other way, and this is reducing reflection off the van going this way. So it's two separate planes. One's off the sky and one is reducing reflections off the van. So depending on where you have your polarizer rotated to, it's gonna affect each composition differently. So no matter what camera platform you're using your polarizer on, it's gonna have the same exact effect. So anything from your phone to your DSLR, mirrorless video camera, anytime you put a polarizer in front of you, even your eyes, you rotate it, it's going to reduce reflected light and yield these same results. And I want to hit on one more benefit of using a polarizer when shooting outdoors, is that you're actually going to be able to increase dynamic range. So a polarizer is going to, remember, reduce reflected light, and the sky has a bunch of reflected light, so up to 1.5 stops at times. So what a polarizer can effectively do is increase your camera's dynamic range by up to 1.5 stops, and that's going to be dependent on where your sky is relative to the sun, but up to 1.5 stops. So this is going to allow you to expose for the shadows a lot better on bright sunny days, making the polarizer perfect to shoot in the middle of the day when you have a huge range between your highlights and your shadows. Now check out this image here. So you can see with the filter, I've got the sky very, very deep blue, and that actually, this one is set up where I am reducing about 1.5 stops from the sky, and you can see it's separating that kind of smoke coming out of that fire in the back So by reducing a stop and a half from the sky, I'm actually able to reduce shutter speed by a stop and a half, which captures more in the shadows. And you can see that in the foreground of this picture in these bushes, where you can see a lot more detail with the polarizer. That's because it's got another stop and a half of light exposed for the shadows here. And another quick example of this is in this composition. You can kind of look closely at the mountain range, and with the filter you can see a lot more detail in that mountain range in the shadows. Same with kind of those bushes lining that mountain range at the bottom. You can see a lot more color and vibrancy with that polarizer set to the maximum for the sky. And that's how you can use a polarizer to help enhance your landscape photography. If you have any questions, shoot us an email. I'm Jeff. I'll see you on the next one.